Good evening and welcome to the Lower Hudson Special Education Task Force program entitled College Acceptance Achieved, Empowering Students with Disabilities to Plan for What Comes Next. My name is Julie Passman and I am a member of the Executive Council of the task force. I'm very excited to be facilitating tonight's program. With us this evening, we have several task force executive council members. We have Alyssa Galea, who is our secretary, and she is managing the Zoom. And we also have co-chairs Debbie Goddard and Jennifer DeShiera may be joining us, Jessica Bauman, Mary Ellen Urini. So before we continue, I just want to mention a couple of housekeeping items. First, attendees can turn on captioning by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your screen. You can then select Show Subtitle, which will show the CC as subtitles on your screen. Or you can click View Full Transcript, which will show a chat box with all of the closed captioning. And you may note that closed captioning is provided by AI. And second, as you may have noticed, we will be recording this evening's program for future viewing. If attendees do not want their name, image, or voice recorded, they should mute themselves and shut off the video throughout the duration of the program. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Lower Hudson Special Education Task Force, we are a regional arm of the New York State Special Education Task Force, which is run under the auspices of Disabilities Rights New York. The task force seeks to bring together the full spectrum of stakeholders in special education, including parents, students, teachers, related service providers, administrators, parent attorneys, and advocates, and school district attorneys, and anyone else who has an interest in special education. We look to bring this broad spectrum of constituents together in forums like this one to share information, exchange ideas, and promote positive outcomes for students with disabilities. That last piece is the most important part, that we want to work together for positive outcomes for students with disabilities. The focus of tonight's program is on navigating the transition to college for students with disabilities. Our expert panel includes a former college counselor and disability specialist, a school psychologist, and a parent attorney who will discuss strategies to strengthen student advocacy skills and share concrete steps to help students secure necessary support and to access accommodations in college. So just a brief introduction of myself and our fabulous panelists. I'm Julie Passman, as I mentioned, and I'm a parent attorney, a New York State Special Education Department impartial hearing officer for special ed matters, and I'm also a parent. Carin Horowitz is the director of the Westchester County Office for People with Disabilities. She previously worked as a transition specialist, special education advocate, and as a disability services director at Bronx Community College and Manhattanville College, where I met Carin in 2011. Christina Sollecito is a dedicated school psychologist in the New York City public schools, bringing over a decade of experience supporting students and their families as they navigate academic, social, emotional, and community-based services. She has a deep commitment to collaborative problem solving, and she works to ensure that every child receives thoughtful, individualized support. As a parent, Christina understands the importance of strong homeschool partnerships. She's also passionate about mentoring graduate students through practicum placements, helping to prepare the next generation of school psychologists for meaningful and impactful careers. And Christina is also a member of our task force executive council. And Marion Walsh is a parent attorney at the Advancement for Orchid Children, PLLC. And she has worn many hats over the years, including she is a current New York State special education impartial hearing officer. She is a prior school district board president, prior school district attorney, and a parent. And Marion is a longtime member of this task force executive council and a former executive council co-chair. So Christina's going to kick off the program by discussing strategies for families and student skill development to facilitate a smooth transition to college. Marion will follow by addressing the legal nuts and bolts of students' rights as they transition from high school to college. And Carin will discuss what success in college looks like for students with disabilities. So this program is in a Zoom meeting format, and you may put questions during the program or comments in the Q&A. So please focus your questions for the Q&A. The chat will not be open except for communicating directly with Alyssa, and that will be just for functionality or accessibility questions. So content questions for a panelist should go in the Q&A. I will mention that questions in the Q&A should be applicable to all participants, and we will not be able to address long-winded questions or comments regarding individual students. We will address as many broadly applicable questions as possible within the allotted time. So let's get started. And Christina?
Okay, I'm here. Can you hear me all? Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm happy to be here. Okay, here we are. Thank you. So the big picture, right? Why does this transition matter? The transition from high school to college. It matters because it's truly a shift in expectations of the student, of the family, of the school. Expectations are changing. So these are just a few bullet points of what to think about as I continue to share during the presentation. So one, college requires greater independence. It requires, what does that look like? Student voice is crucial. We can support our students, but really hearing from them and them having that accountability for themselves is going to drive their success in college and the accessibility for the supports they need. Two, supports exist, but the student must request them. Again, that independence. Three, self-advocacy becomes a critical life skill. So we're talking about self-advocating, not just in the school setting, but really transferring those skills beyond. We're looking in the future, right? Employment. What does that look like for each individual person? And then lastly, preparation should really begin early and intentionally. So I'm going to now touch upon each of those areas and what it looks like. And again, this is individualized. So if you're a student right now listening, or if you're a guardian, a parent, it's really, student driven. It depends on the student's level of functioning, right? Cognitively. Some students may be very medically fragile. So I just, of course, want to hone in on fostering independence, and that's going to look different for every student, okay? So shifting the mindset and normalizing this process. Understanding one's learning needs is not a weakness. It's really showing someone's self-awareness, right, of themselves and a sense of maturity and giving students the opportunity to be who they need to be. Two, everyone learns differently and accommodations are tools. Especially, at the elementary school level, middle school, high school, there's accommodations. The goal is to individualize them on the IEP, and it's really to level the playing field for students to access the curriculum through the accommodations. But once we transition out of high school into college, that looks different. Okay. And lastly, knowing what helps you learn is empowering. So again, you know, taking the power within your own hands as a student, it gives you a sense of control, right? It gives you a sense of autonomy. And again, creating opportunities for yourself, whether they're small, large, wherever you want to work on for yourself. And again, this translates into your future life, employment, relationship skills. If you know yourself, you're going to have a better chance to living the life you want to live and knowing what supports you may need. So starting early, this is what I mentioned in the beginning, preparing students through meaningful IEP development. So what does that look like? Students should gradually get to know, what is my diagnosis? How do I learn best? What's my learning profile, right? Why do these accommodations exist for me? And again, practicing using the student's voice in safe spaces, which I will touch on in a moment. So again, the outcome is the big picture. Early involvement fosters independence, confidence, and advocacy skills for yourself. And I just want to touch on, before we advance the slide, that, part of my work is working with the middle school students, especially eighth graders. And I can see as a school psychologist that what students have been told about their IEP and what students have not. So what have I observed through my experience in the school system is students who don't have any exposure at all or don't even know what an IEP is, there's a lot of anxiety, right? And that's another component that, may not be in someone's favor. So we want to reduce the anxiety. We want to build the confidence earlier on. And again, I want to preface that looks different for each student, for each family. But again, it's the exposure. It's taking baby steps, and it's going to look different for everyone. The importance of self-knowledge. So I like this visual. One of our other panelists shared it, and I love that we put it here. So students, you could ask yourself, who am I? Do I want to go to college? 2-year, 4-year? What are my interests? What do I want to gain from this college experience? What type of learner am I? So what type of learner am I? Look at this visual here. Visual, I learn by seeing. I learn by hearing. I'm a kinesthetic type of learner. I need to be hands-on. I need to have manipulatives. I need to have visuals. I need to use a smart board. I need to use all three. And this is a big component of what's written in the IEP for you as the student. And I know we have parents on here, we have guardians on this presentation, as guests. But as you can see from my tone as a school psychologist, I speak with the student. My goal is to, draw in the student, engage the student, so they could build these skills of confidence and to self-advocate. This is the whole point. So start thinking about, if you're a student on here, how do you learn best? Because you need to know that to see what you need in the future. What changes from high school to college? So in high school, middle school, the adult initiates the services, right? The parent, the guardian. There's heavily involved families. And in college, it all shifts. Students need to disclose their disability. Students need to request the accommodations and manage the communication with the appropriate people at the college level on staff. So if you think about it, sometimes in these earlier years, elementary, middle school, high school, some families, not all, the IEP, through my experiences, could be on the hush, on the low. But if we want to continue services and if there's eligibility for that student for special education services, the disclosure needs to occur. So, and it's the student's responsibility because now they're at a certain age level where that needs to happen. So the student needs to know themselves and speak for themselves. And a big part of the IEP document as well that I want to touch on, at the high school level, is student voice has to be all over that document. That's the best way, and that's the way to do it. We want to hear from the student on academic development. We want to hear social emotional development, physical development. We want to know what's going on in your level of functioning, again, so you have access to the curriculum, so you have access to what you need to learn best. So this is great. This is some, resources for you all. IEP meeting tools. Um, there's various, versions online you could look up. You could put something together yourself. You could use what's in front of you as a template. So IEP meeting worksheet for the student. It's kind of what I just reviewed. What's challenging for me? What am I good at? What do I want to work toward? During my student interviews as a school psychologist, I conduct student interviews on initial evaluations, reevaluations, 3-year reviews. I just like to do that, especially 3-year reviews, because that's a comprehensive evaluation. It's been 3 years and a lot has changed. The older students get, especially someone who has the language and the communication skills, they may have a lot to share. So I kind of comb through parts of the IEP with my students, and it's becoming more of a practice of mine. However, I want to share here on this presentation, doing all of that takes a lot of time, a lot of patience and work and sit down time with the student that in reality of the system that we're in isn't always doable. So that's why parents and guardians and that family involvement is essential for you to have your own parent checklist. And again, give your child, the student, the opportunity to go through a worksheet with you. So for example, I want to touch on a couple weeks ago, I sat down with an 8th grader and went through his IEP with him. He appeared clueless of what was going on for him, right? I printed out a brief IEP student checklist. I reviewed a couple of questions. I didn't want to overwhelm him. And I gave his mom a heads up. I gave it to him. This is going home with him. I encourage you to review it with so and so. Now, it's on the onus of the parent whether he or she does that or not. But again, as the school psychologist on the team, it's my responsibility, personally, I feel, that I provide the resource, that I educate the family, that I educate the student. So, this again is at the middle school, high school level. That level of involvement and step-by-step involvement with the family may not be occurring so tightly and closely, maybe as it would in college. And we have one of our panelists who could speak to that. But, it's a different level of support. I guess I could put it that way, right? So, and we'll hear more from Carin later on about that. But I just wanted to share this tool. I think it's very important. And parents, guardians, remind your student, your child, that their voice matters because they're going to have to use it in the future. And resources for parents, another resource if you need support understanding the IEP. Transition services begin the year the student turns 15 in the state of New York. If you need support understanding your child's diagnosis, their educational classification, which is on the first page of the IEP, you could reach out for a private conversation prior to any formal meeting. Prepare yourself. Contact people on the school-based support team in high school, the school psychologist, the social worker, the guidance counselor. Maybe you want to meet with the whole group together. It doesn't have to be formal. It could be more casual, and it's a resource for you. And I encourage, parents and guardians to take advantage of that earlier on.
I'm just sorry, going to hop in here for a second. We
Mhm.
had a request for more subtitles, so I just need to re share the screen for us. All right. Unfortunately, that is not working, but we will see if we can offer that as an option into the recording. Apologies for that. We'll put the screen back up.
Thank you, Alyssa. You could advance the slide. And students may need to know the following. Again, understanding their learning needs, the student's diagnosis and classification, accommodations and goals, and an important reminder to families, if your child's already in high school and all of what I've been saying hasn't been emphasized, maybe with some more clarity, it's okay. Just begin when you think it's appropriate. It's not too late because you have to start somewhere, especially if college is on the horizon, and that student voice is very important. Shifting gears, talking about the student to talking with the student. So at the IEP meetings in high school, you may want to start implementing this as parents and guardians and students. Talk collaboratively at the table or on a virtual IEP and open it up with questions directed to the student and waiting for a response. So we're not talking about the student while they're sitting right in front of us. It's so easy to fall into that habit. I've been there and I've done it. But when I have a student at my table in front of me, I'm speaking with the person and not about the person, because that could be uncomfortable for that person. And invite that student to share what's working, what feels hard, and what helps. Also, parents, students, and guardians, it's okay to ask for a pause. Can you slow down? Can we go back for a minute and just, touch base on the social emotional component of my son? And maybe another example, can you talk about what that data looks like? What do you mean a score of 360 on an iReady ELA? Like, what does that mean? So, another thing to just keep in mind, everyone, is that these IEP meetings in my dream world, I wish they were an hour and a half or an hour and 15 minutes, but we're going by periods most of the time, 30 minutes, 40 minutes. And when you're talking about a 3-year triennial review, there's so much to cover. So it's like everyone wants to share the progress, the highlights, the glows of the student too. But it's okay to stop and pause. And again, developing those self-advocacy skills. How can you practice to the students here? Pick a class, raise your hand, ask a question. It may not be every day, but mindfully tell yourself, okay, I need to practice using my voice. What does that look like for me? All right, I don't participate in math a lot, but you know what? This week, I'm going to do it twice. That's what I got in me, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to raise my hand. I'm going to ask a question. Again, ask for help. That's a big thing I see with the 7th and 8th graders I work with. I hear it from the teachers all the time. It's like, I know he knows this, but he needs to ask for help. You could role play with a parent, a friend, a guidance counselor. You could take a lead in a group project. Maybe you're in a group project with 5 people, buddy up with one of the people that's maybe a friend or someone you're familiar with, and work together and present together. You may not take the lead in a group of 5, but you could pair up with someone. And again, bringing this all forward to independent living skills, because that's the goal. What works for you as the student? How do you want to manage your day to day, your week to week? Are you a write down planner type of person? Do you keep it in your phone? Do you have to, put a calendar on your tablet? Do you use all three? I mean, I do that too. hard copy planner, technology, whatever works for you. But again, starting earlier, the better. In middle school, build those routines because it's going to bring you to where you need to be in college. And again, it's not about doing it alone in college. It's about knowing how to ask. It's about building your confidence, using your voice, understanding yourself, and believing that your needs and your requests are valid and that people need to hear them.
Thank you so much, Christina. That was really terrific.
Thank
I think it
you.
was really great to launch this program with really developing an understanding of what students need to do early on to prepare for the transition. So thank you. I just want to make sure that I announce to everyone, and Alyssa, if you can confirm this with me, we will be sharing the PowerPoint and the recording will be made available. Now, Alyssa, I don't know if you're able to just tell us how that will be made available. Will it be on our website?
It will be posted on the Special Education Task Force YouTube page, and then everyone who registered for this presentation will also receive an email with the slides as an attachment and the link to the recording when it is available, which is typically within a couple business days.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So next we have Marion Walsh, who will be talking to us about the legal nuts and bolts of the transition from high school to college.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for attending tonight on this important topic. And thank you, Christina, for that really important background, because this is just so important for this transition. And what we see, so we're going to have a little bit of repetition in the presentation, but we all have our own perspective, and I'm going to give you the legal nuts and bolts, the legal rights students have, what changes legally, which is so important for students and parents to understand and prepare, because this transition is so significant. So when we talk about the transition to college, what changes legally? It's not anyone's imagination. There's so many laws that change right at that transition point, just when there's so many emotional transitions, academic transitions, and adjustments in other ways. So this is a really important time to be prepared for. And just starting from the bottom of the point, when a student with a disability leaves college with either a 504 plan or an IEP, the high school or the public school district or even the private school is having more of an oversight role. They're the ones who will identify a disability, at least in the public school. They will call meetings. They will provide services. You have, before college, in public school, students have a right to an education. It's a right in the New York State Constitution. That is not true of the college post-secondary experience. It's an entitlement. That's a major change legally, because there's no right to stay in college. There's no right to finish college. There's no right to get the supports. It's access. So there is going to be a whole new criteria for eligibility for services. And this student, the student that Christina is working with, developing this voice, is going to be directing the services and has to really be a self-advocate. I have to emphasize how hard that is and it doesn't always happen that often, but we'll talk about that after. And then on top of it all, the student now is an adult legally. At 18 in New York and most other states, you are legally an adult. So parents are really not part of the process unless the student chooses to include them. There are some exceptions. So just to go over some of the laws and regulations that change, we talked about a little bit, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is the law that controls special education, obligates public school districts. They have an affirmative obligation to identify, evaluate, and locate students with disabilities. That is not true in college. They have to provide a free appropriate public education. They have to identify, and again, this team works with the student each year and has to, and parents are mandated part of the process. So none of that is true in college under the IDA. Their 504 applies, but it's very different in college. And college, we'll talk about the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504. They're both anti-discrimination laws and are have been in effect. 504 has been in effect since 73, and then ADA since 1990, and prohibit discrimination. But however, it's what's reasonable. Again, it's not necessarily a mandate, it's access. And in college, a student has to meet admissions criteria to get in and for eligibility. And again, they have to self-disclose. And I work with a lot of students, or not a lot, but some who call our law firm will say, what legal rights do I have? Or the parents will call the students failing. I'm failing my classes. I'm on probation. And this is all because of my disability, my ADHD and my anxiety. And then my first question is, well, do you have a plan? Did you disclose it? Well, no, but I have this disability. You have to disclose it, and that's very, very difficult often for students to realize early on. So you can then disclose at that point, but your accommodations will not be retroactive, and that can be difficult, obviously. And then we'll talk about privacy, but under privacy laws, the parents are not automatically included. So just to talk, as Christina talked about the preparations before college, we'll just talk about the preparations that you sort of need to do right before, just legal nuts and bolts. And parents and students should be having these accommodations and really understand these obligations. That just the parent is probably paying tuition, a lot of tuition, and some parents think, well, I'm paying tuition, I'm automatically included. That is not the case. So it's important to just have this really frank conversation to your student to say, hey, this is a really big step. We're so proud of you. We're so happy for you. And we do need to be part of this process because we are financially responsible, but you are an adult, and you are an adult, rather. So I think you can talk about what forms you'll need. We'll talk a little bit when we talk about FERPA and HIPAA, but we recommend, power of attorney, consent signed. When the student is ready, you should look at the student handbook. Very few people read the handbook until there's really an issue, but it's good to be prepared. Students should look at that date when they can withdraw from classes without penalty. What are the penalties? And then, parents may want to consider tuition insurance. I highly recommend this because tuition can be 80, 90, even more, $1,000 a year. And if the student does need to leave the college, has a really hard semester the first time, due to a condition, parents can recover a portion of that at least. So it's a really good idea. And talk to the college about that early on, parents. Parents and students can create lists and plans, and how are you going to contact each other? And we can, so it's important to have this frank conversation and consider what additional supports the student may need if they are having difficulty. Okay, and just going next.
Marion, I just want to interrupt for 1 second because I think this might be that one attendee posed the question that might be good to help frame it going forward. Are there any differences in legal rights that you're talking about in a private college versus a public school, a state school? So I just want to put that out there because I thought it was interesting for the landscape.
Yes, absolutely. And when we talk about 504 and the ADA, we'll definitely touch on that. But any school that receives federal funds is going to be required to comply with both Section 504 and the ADA, and almost all colleges, even private colleges, receive some federal funds. So there isn't too much of a difference, but there's certainly a difference in resources often. But thank you. So, but on privacy, this is really important because the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act of 1974, you'll hear that called FERPA forms. And then you've heard of HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Both are very protective of individual privacy. And these rights transfer to a student at 18 when the student's in elementary school. So even if a student enrolls at 17 or even 16, they would still transfer. And there are some exceptions when colleges can include parents, such as health and safety emergencies, such as when the student is a financial dependent. So there is that exception. However, the default is that the colleges will communicate with the students because they really want the students also to be that self-advocate. They're not, the parents are not attending college. The parents are not going to school. The parents are not writing the papers. So the parents are not the ones who are advocating. So the colleges really foster that as well. Very rare. It's very rare that a professor will talk to parents, even with a FERPA waiver. So the students are in the driver's seat, put it that way. So I would recommend parents and students talk and ask the student to consider signing a FERPA waiver, which would be from the college form that says, I consent for you to speak to my parents, and then also a HIPAA waiver, which is more for medical needs, and that would be if the counseling office needs that, or even a hospital, and there can be just a general HIPAA form. And then even more than that, you consider advanced directives, health power of attorney, and healthcare proxy. An attorney can do that, or there are some electronic forms online, which I don't necessarily recommend, but it's better than not having anything, certainly. So that's on the privacy, and this is just so important to understand because a lot of parents just expect either to be able to call or to be really involved, and they can be involved, but it's through the student. The student, you have to go through. The student is the leader here. Okay, so next we're going to talk about just some of the disability laws that extend to college, and again we mentioned Section 504 in the ADA, and they protect you from discrimination. And I think we did talk about this, that even under 504, if you have a 504 in high school, it doesn't automatically just extend to college. There is a new process of eligibility, and it's a different standard. There's not the same type of written plan that most public school districts have. Okay. And the legal requirements on college campuses are a little bit different, and it gets the ADA and 504. We don't have to get into all the legal distinctions, but when people think about the ADA, they think of physical access, of ramps, that they're providing equal access to facilities, of barrier-free entrances. And ADA doesn't just cover that; it covers all disabilities, but it is a little bit broader than 504 in the sense that it requires that physical access for everybody. And that requirements for new construction, alterations, dorm access, things like that. But it also will cover academic programs. And then in addition to that general access, there is equal access under 504 in the ADA that's more individualized. And it can focus on this programmatic access. What accommodations do you need to participate in school based on your disability? Do you need extra time? Do you have a processing disorder? Do you have ADHD? You're not going to get, like you would in high school, say redirection, but you would be able to probably get extended time. Do you have significant anxiety or subject to depression? Do you need an accommodation to attendance policies? So those are things that every student should think about. Also in housing accommodations, do you have a food allergy that you need to be in a certain dorm? And it's not that the college is going to guarantee you won't be exposed to something, but they can give you some accommodations. So it's all based on what's a reasonable accommodation as far as the individualized access. Now, we'll talk a little bit next about how you qualify in college under Section 504 and ADA. We already talked about this. You have to disclose, and under 504 and ADA, you have to have a documented physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And it's a relatively low standard. It can be, because breathing, thinking, learning are all major life activities, and a lot of disabilities will have an impact. I mentioned a learning disability will have an impact. ADHD, anxiety, and you have to have a record or perceived as having such an impairment. And so, we can talk a little bit about what documentation you need, and I think Carin will talk about that as well. But you should note that the standard will be, again, reasonable accommodations. So say you get into this course and you say, this is just way too much for me in the syllabus. I cannot write all these papers. It's not going to be an accommodation that you write less papers. You may have more time to write them, but the college does not have to lower or substantially modify essential requirements. And they don't have to fundamentally alter programs. So you will have the same amount of work, the same amount of reading. It just could be in a different format, and it may not be in the format that you would like. They don't have to provide personal attendance. But you may have an accommodation to bring in your own attendant or have your own reader, or other device, but they're not going to provide that equipment for you generally, depending on the college. Okay. And then what documentation is required? You should bring a diagnosis of the current disability, and there should be adult testing done, which I think Carin may talk about, which would be, if it's a learning disability, it should be on an adult testing scale, and then if it's a diagnosis, date of the diagnosis, how it was reached, and the credentials, a letter from a psychiatrist. It's a good idea to give the IEP exit summary, which is what a student gets when they graduate or leave high school, or a Section 504 plan. And then information on how the disability affects a major life activity. And this can be ideally a relatively detailed letter from a provider, such as it could be from a therapist, it could be a psychiatrist, it could be a teacher, even from the school. So it's a good idea to prepare for that documentation before getting to college by the deadline. Okay. And then when should the request be made? We recommend making the request after acceptance, because we just don't know if there's discrimination involved. And so you don't have to disclose before. But you should do it earlier in the process. You can ask a lot of questions at Accepted Students Day. Then you're in. You can find out about how students with disabilities function at the college, and how colleges treat neurodiversity. Is there support for it? And then just when you have to make sure you're in compliance with the college handbook for adjustment requests. And remember, a lot of students forget you have to renew this every semester. And it's a really good idea for students to have those skills to be able to talk to professors. And that's hard to do. One student I was working with, she was so successful. And she would say to professors each semester, I just want you to know I have major depression. And you may not see it, you may not know it, but I may not be in class. And here's my plan, here's my accommodation plan, and I have trouble with attendance. So if you see me and not in class, if I'm late with things, I assure you I'm not lazy. I just have this really challenging disability, and I'm doing my best. And that is really incredible and powerful. And but for students to be able to do that and reach that level, metacognitive, have those skills, is really challenging. And that's why Christina was talking about getting to know yourself as a student. But the thing about it's hard if students don't do this, parents can't force this. You can't write a letter to the professor saying my child has, you can, but it's not going to be respected in the same way. And it will just be, you could get a polite note back, but it's not going to be the same. It has to be from the student. Okay. And then if you need additional documentation, say things change, say your disability becomes more significant, I mentioned anxiety, we'll talk about that after, but that seems to be very common with college students today, unfortunately. But if you develop another disability, the college is not going to pay for any evaluations. You have to provide the new documentation, or if something changes. Okay, we can keep going. And then if the adjustments are not working, we recommend first collaborative efforts, cooperation, speak with the coordinator of Office of Accessibility or Disability Services. You can talk to your professors, and then you can write a detailed letter. And then you do have the right to a college grievance policy to make a grievance as well, or appeal any decisions. There's each college will have its own procedures. Okay. And then I just want to talk a little bit about student mental health needs. I alluded to it without the presentation, but I was also a board member and volunteer for the National Alliance for Mental Illness. You probably heard of NAMI, but we see mental health struggles are just so real in college, and students often don't identify them or are reluctant to seek help. And sadly, suicide is a leading cause of death in the United States for young people. So it's just important to be aware, and I recommend this NAMI College Mental Health Guide. It has a lot of what we're talking about seeking accommodations and getting support. And again, I recommend when you have that conversation, even if your child doesn't have a mental health condition, or just have a conversation about what your child should do if they feel overwhelmed. They should know what to do. Where is the counseling center? Review the college phone number for contact in a mental health crisis. And there is the 988 number, not 911, but 988 will give mental health support. And also tell them, call home. Don't worry, there's nothing you can do that is too much, So that's important that they have that open communication. But just remember that college staff doesn't have to notify parents if there's something that comes up. If a student isn't in class all semester, for example, no one has to tell the parents. They might give notices to the student, hey, you're not in class, but no one's going to tell the parents that. So I'm just noting. And so it's just important to have these really great conversations. Now I'm going to turn it over to Carin. And thank you all. And we can have some questions at the end. Okay. Take care.
Marion, I just want to interrupt now because I think that, first of all, that was terrific. Someone asked an important question about would it ever be appropriate for a student with autism to have a housing accommodation of a private room? And I think that sort of potentially taps into your last slide. And I was really thinking that it depends how you frame it, how you frame your request for the student and explain what the specific needs are of that particular student with autism. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's certainly not guaranteed, and even if it's needed, because there might not be room in the college. And again, it's what's reasonable from the college's perspective. However, it certainly could be very reasonable, and so it just is really, again, like everything else, what's the reasonable accommodation? What can the college do? What's available? But I think it's a good one, certainly important to ask for.
And I would just add that it can sometimes, the receipt of accommodations can sometimes depend on how clear the student and the family is on explaining what the challenges are that are associated with that disability. What is it about the student's disability? Do they have difficulty with sudden noises of a roommate walking in the middle of the night? Would that derail the student and adversely impact their learning and deprive them of access to their education? So I encourage families to really think about, really being specific in disclosing and explaining how the student might be impacted when they make that request.
Exactly. And then also be flexible because it may be that even if you are very specific and have a need and you have all the right documentation, the college may say, I'm sorry, we just can't do that. But then, okay, well, what can we do? How can we eliminate the noise? Do we, you can have, obviously roommate selections and there's a lot of things. So that's the thing, to be a little bit flexible too, which is hard on what will give you that access you need and what can the college do? So,
right. I think that's important, that colleges don't have to give you the accommodation that you request. They may need to accommodate you, but it can be in a different manner than the way that was requested. Right. So thank you so much, Marion. That was terrific overview of the nuts and bolts of the legal framework. And now we have Carin Horowitz, who will discuss navigating transition to college.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. I also just want to add into that discussion about housing. I would add not just parents and students talking about what their needs are for that accommodation, but that documentation from their provider, from the diagnostician, about why that accommodation gives that student access. Because as Marion said, this is about the laws that cover college are about access, not necessarily benefit. So having that professional documentation as well would support that request for that private room if it might be available. But every college is a little bit different in how they do things. So there is no sort of one answer for every college. All right, so I'm going to kind of talk from the college perspective. I will try and stay focused. I've worked both at a high school as a transition specialist and as a special ed advocate with special ed lawyers. So thank you so much, Christina and Marion, for your wonderful presentations. I will try and focus it on the college perspective. But, as Marion said, we are going to repeat some themes throughout, but again, coming from those specific perspectives. Okay, so I'm going to cover a little bit about what's out there in terms of supports at college, what things you want to consider about yourself as a student or about your child and their learning and what their needs are for accommodations. And then, what questions you want to be asking the college based on those considerations. I'm going to talk a little bit about getting set up with accommodations at college, and then a little bit about what students can do to get ready, just reiterating some of the things that Christina brought up. Next slide. I do want to make a mention quickly about admissions before we jump into the supports, because I think Marion alluded to this a little bit about, asking questions about what supports are available after acceptance, because of admissions. So just because I find this is a question that comes up a lot and people are concerned about what will the college know ahead of time. What you should know is that the college will not know. If a student is in a special education class or getting special education services, that is not reflected on the IEP at all. Not reflected on the transcript at all. It is required that it be off of that transcript legally. So for the privacy rights of that student, that information is not sent directly to a college. An IEP is not sent directly to a college unless that is requested by a student. So the admissions office would not know unless a student chooses to disclose, let's say, in their essay. The colleges are not allowed to ask on an admissions form whether or not a student has a disability, and there's one exception to that I'll get to in a moment. So just because that question often comes up, admissions will not know unless a student chooses to have that discussion. So, okay, so what services are available at college? So this is just a slide that shows what's available to all students at many colleges. You might not have everything, but many colleges have some sort of tutoring center. It may be specific to math or writing. They may have career services. Certainly there are office hours. All colleges have academic advising. They'll have health services. Many will have counseling services. They will all have a library. So this is available to any student, disability or not. And so it's important to know what's available to all students, as well as any additional supports that might be available for students with disabilities. Next slide. So I broke out a little bit of sort of levels of college support when we talk about students with learning disabilities, learning differences. And I'm going to start from the bottom. The bottom is accommodations only. So every college, as Marion mentioned, if they accept college federal funds, is required to provide accommodations free of charge under the ADA in Section 504. Now, that includes accepting money through FAFSA. So if you've got students coming in and they're getting federal financial aid, that's you accepting as a college federal funds. So pretty much every college is going to have to provide accommodations at a bare minimum. Most colleges will have a dedicated person or office for this. Very, very small colleges may have somebody where it's a part of their job, but there will be a point person on the campus for accommodations only. And then we go up to the next, what I consider the next level of service, which is a college that has the accommodations, of course, but then they may also offer some skill building. And that usually comes with a fee. So when we talk about that last slide with services and supports that are available to all students, there may also be additional student services specifically for students with disabilities, separate and apart from accommodations, because those accommodations are free. But these fee-based programs may focus on academic tutoring. They may focus on executive functioning skills. Some of them may do both. They may be targeted to a specific population like autism or learning disabilities. But more and more colleges are adding this type of service, this type of program. The fees can range widely from anywhere from, I mean, I've seen anything from $1,500 a semester to $5,000 a semester. So these do come at a cost. Many of them you sign up semester to semester. So it's something that someone could use just in the transition to where they can build those skills that they need for the very different environment that college is giving them. And some people stay with it the entire time they're there, but becoming more and more popular are these separate programs, again, for a fee that will give you that extra support, sometimes just for that transition. And then up from there, I've listed, there's a very small number of colleges that offer what I consider more of a holistic support program. And these are often for students with autism who may have multiple levels of need or similar profile. So these are colleges that have really comprehensive fee-based support programs that are not just giving academic and social skill support. They may also give independent living support in the residence halls. and all those executive functioning skills as well. I'm going to mention some examples here. I don't endorse any in particular, but it's just to give you an idea. Locally, Pace University and the New York City campus, and soon to be the Pleasantville campus, has a program called Oasis. And that is an example of a program that provides this more holistic experience for students in terms of this extra fee-based support. And then lastly, at the top, I mentioned before with admissions and disclosure, there are a very, very small number of colleges, two only that I'm aware of, Beacon College in Florida and Landmark College in Vermont, that are dedicated college for students with disabilities. And so for those colleges, a disability is required as part of your application. So they will ask questions about the disability and about the learning needs to see if you're a fit for that college. So I like to just have this chart just to show you that there are a lot of different level support out there when you're doing your college searching. And so it's important to start thinking about what the needs of the student are, what the needs of the child are, to figure out where they might fall on this spectrum of services. Next
Now,
slide.
before you move
Yep.
on, I think that the slide we were just on and the one coming up might be a good time to answer. One attendee asked, what's the difference between access and benefit?
Yeah, so I think Marion alluded to the fact that she talked a little bit about entitlements before and eligibility. So I always like to say when you're moving from high school where you've got IDEA, you're moving from a system of entitlement to a system of eligibility. And so under the entitlement, under IDEA, the IEP is going to have accommodations and services on there that are not only going to provide access and a level playing field for students, but they're going to be things that benefit the student, right? That we think would be good for them because the high school and the IEP, they want the student to succeed and get across that finish line and graduate with a diploma. At college, there's no such requirement for success. There's only requirement for access. So that ADA and that 504, and Marion, please jump in if I'm misspeaking at all. That 504 and IDA are really just about equal access. So we're going to talk again more about documentation a little bit later, but if I'm receiving documentation as a disability services provider, if you're asking me for something and the documentation doesn't show that you have a specific disabling condition in that area, I'm not going to grant an accommodation in that area. It might be something you had in high school, but unfortunately, if it's just was given to you because they wanted to give you everything, every chance you have to be successful, that's not what the college's focus is. Does that answer the question?
I think so. I mean, just to clarify, a student attending college has a right to have access. Any post-secondary program accepting federal funds must provide students with access. They need to be able to walk up the door to walk in the door to the classroom. They need to be able to hear the professor. But they don't have to benefit. And then you listed in that nice chart on the prior slide, there are fee-based programs. So the student may benefit from the fee-based program.
Yeah.
Parents at the bottom, accommodations only, those need to be free to the, they can't be an additional charge for the family.
Yes.
But for these other programs that may very well provide benefits, they can charge an extra fee.
I think you both described it so well. And remember the term reasonable also, it's reasonable accommodations for access. So the list of benefits for a student could be endless, a one-to-one, maybe an assistant, maybe, someone who's taking notes. And that is not what the college necessarily is going to do, except on these fee-based programs. So there could be a reasonable accommodation of allowing someone to take notes or getting notes. So just an example, but you described it really well, Carin and Julie. So thank you.
All right. So just a quick note on some fee-based services that may be available outside of the college. More and more companies are popping up that are providing like more or less push-in services, either virtually or if they are a local company, they may be able to, meet a student on campus. And this was in response to there not being that many programs out there and people wanting to go to the college they wanted to go to, but the college they wanted to go to didn't have an extra fee-based support program and they wanted that. So a number of different services have popped up that provide virtual opportunities for coaching, social coaching, executive functioning, coaching, academic tutoring, all that. And of course, private therapists are an outside independent provider. Again, I'm going to give you an example. I should have mentioned, I do have a handout that I'm going to be sending along. This is going to be sending out with the PowerPoint. And it has a number of these things I'm mentioning on there, so you don't need to take notes. There is an organization called New Frontiers Executive Coaching that works in the New York metro area, and they do remote and in-person, depending on where you are. There's a program called Career Next upstate, and they partner with Hudson Valley Community College and SUNY Cobleskill and provide support to students on those two campuses. And then they also do remote. So there's all different models out there. So if your child is dead set on a specific school, but they don't have the matching level of support that they're looking for, there may be some remote opportunities for them to get some of that same support. Next slide. So this is not an exhaustive list, but this is a sample of some of the accommodations you might see in college. I do want to mention that oftentimes accommodations may lessen a little bit because, as I mentioned before, there's sort of the benefit access question. The disability services provider is charged with seeing the documentation and listening to the student about what their needs are and matching an accommodation to give them just access. So students may see a reduction. But this is a list of some of the typical things that you might see for exams, maybe extended time, a scribe or reader, timed breaks, a separate location, calculator, computer use. And then some in-class things might be sign language interpreters, real-time captioning, note-taking accommodation. Important to note with all of these is that colleges, there is no one manual that every college needs to follow. So everyone's going to have their own policies and procedures on how to do things. Course substitutions is a perfect example of that. It was mentioned earlier, I think by Marion, that a college is not required to modify anything for a student in terms of programs, which means they're not necessarily going to exempt anything, but they might substitute something. So for example, if you have a math specific disability documented, and math is a general ed requirement for your degree, they may offer you a substitution that's a non-math course that's math adjacent, let's say. But if math is required as part of your chosen major, they will not substitute that. So again, you have to really dig deep with some of these colleges to find out what their processes and procedures are, but the accommodation may not be as it looks in high school. So they may offer note-taking accommodation, but it might not be the way that a student received it in high school. In high school, maybe the teacher gave them their notes. In the college, professor might not be willing to give notes. It may be that you can record classes or some other way to access that accommodation. So they don't have to do exactly the accommodation exactly the way that you request. But if you are approved for the accommodation, they need to provide it. On the bottom, I just want to quickly mention before we go to the next slide, colleges are not required to provide personal assistance. However, if a student has one that they're privately paying for, that their insurance is paying for, an accommodation may be that assistant can be on campus and can be in classes with them and can go wherever non-students wouldn't necessarily be able to go. Transportation, colleges are not required to provide dedicated specific transportation for students with disabilities unless they're providing transportation to all students. If they have a shuttle into town, they need to make it accessible. If it's for all students, they need to make it accessible, but they don't need to have specific transportation if they're not providing it for all students. And similarly, tutoring, unless they're providing it to all students. Next slide. Okay, so on this slide, I just sort of want you to think about who the student is, and then based on that, what questions you might want to ask. Now, in terms of the asking questions, you can ask general questions about accommodations and how things work and policies and procedures at any point during the college search time. Where we want you to wait until you've been accepted is to ask those specific questions about yourself and how it might look for your specific disability and what accommodations you might be able to get. They're not going to look at any of your documentation until after you've been accepted. So the first thing to consider is level of academic support needed. And this is what I was talking about earlier with the different tiers of support. So thinking about what that is, and then what does this college have available? Do they offer anything above and beyond those free accommodations? Is it fee for service? Who delivers those services? Is it a learning specialist? Is it a peer tutor? What level of support is it that you would be getting? Do they offer more than academic support? Is it done in a group, one-on-one? Second thing you want to think about is accessibility of accommodations. And this is what I mentioned earlier, is asking them, well, I'm used to getting note-taking accommodations. How does that look at your college? How do you implement note-taking accommodations? Is it that you can record classes? Can you get a copy of the lecture? Are there volunteer note takers sitting in the classroom that are anonymously turning in notes to the disability office to give you? What does it actually look like at your college? Marion touched on the third, which is the importance of mental health supports. If that is something that is needed, it's something you really want to look at the college. Most colleges offer some short-term services, but not necessarily long-term. If you have a home therapist, how does that work if there's a crisis on campus? Do they offer a 24-hour crisis line? What is the training of the staff at the counseling center? Also considering student life and campus connectedness. What are you looking for on a campus? Are there clubs and activities of interest? Are there social supports if you need it? How does one request housing accommodations, which we touched on? And really important is the curriculum and looking at the rigor and the requirements. When I was at Manhattanville, oftentimes I had students who were really excited about the level of support because they offer extra fee-based programs. But then when you think about the curriculum, that might not be a match. So it's important to be thinking about both at the same time. What level of support am I looking for? But also, is this curriculum a match for what my needs are and what I want to do? And I'm not just talking about major. Because if you think about like a liberal arts college is going to require you to do a lot of different things, right? A little this, a little of that, a little of everything. We're not all good at a little of this and a little. Some of us just want to focus on the thing that is a strength for us. And so maybe a liberal arts curriculum isn't a great match for me if that's not for me. So thinking about both the requirements as well as those that level of support. Okay. Let's move right along. I'm going to try and not talk too fast, but I know we want to allow enough time for questions. So I'll try and roll through the last few slides as quickly as I can. Marion talked about the legal differences between high school and college. This is just a brief, responsibilities and expectations. And I think we covered a bunch of this already. But, in high school, curriculum can be modified. Student time is structured by others. Teacher will offer help and reminders. Accommodations and supports are arranged by the school team. Inappropriate behavior might just result, if it's a result of disability, might be a modification of the program. And the school team is fully aware of supports needs and classification. And in college, pretty much none of that is true. As we know, students have to manage their own time. Professors expect the students to initiate contact if they need any help. Students are the ones who are going to choose to use their accommodation and must arrange them. Many colleges now use online systems. There's one called Accommodate that most colleges use, and you can apply for services through that. And you can also arrange for your services. And it's really important to note that if you register as a student with a disability with the accessibility office, it may be called accessibility office, accommodations office, disability services office. All you are is registered. Nothing happens until you say, I want this to happen. So you have to decide as a student every semester, do I want to use accommodations? Do I want to use them for all my classes or only some of my classes? Maybe again, if I only have a math disability, maybe I only want to use the classes that have math content in them. So every semester, a student is taking that lead and deciding, do I want to access my accommodations this semester? Do I want those professors notified that I I'm going to use my accommodations. And then let's say at the beginning of the semester, you have it sent to your professors. The professors won't even do anything until you then say, I want to use it. So if you have an accommodation for testing, each time there's a test, you have to say, I would like to use my accommodation for this test. So at every step of the way, again, this is why it's so very important for students to build those self-advocacy skills, because they really, really are driving the bus here and making it happen. Okay, next slide. Okay, so getting set up, we talked a little bit about this before, but every college is going to have their own processes and procedures, so you want to just become familiar with that. Most of the websites will give you that information on the site, and then when you're on your tours, you can ask to stop by that office or speak to somebody about how it all works. You can register for disability services at any point in your college career. Of course, it's best to do it early and often, especially in that difficult transition to college, but it can be done later. It can be done sophomore year, junior year, whenever a student feels they need it. As it was mentioned before, the IEP and the 504 plan, those are historical documents in terms of thinking about accommodations. They're not a diagnosis of a disability, but they're very valuable to provide to the Disability Services Office, just so they can see what was provided in high school and some narrative that's on that IEP or on that 504 as to why those things were needed. It's very helpful to supplement the actual evaluations that might be provided. And the disability services staff, they're going to review all of the documentation, and they're going to talk with the student, not the student and the parent, the student, to find out more about what their needs are. And I used to have all the time, students would come and sit in my office and they'd say, my parent signed me up. I'm not sure why I'm here. And I'd say, well, tell me about your disability. And they would answer, I don't know, I just get extra time on tests. So it's really, really important for students to understand themselves so that they can be successful in college. So again, that documentation has to be by a qualified professional, needs to have diagnostic statement. Really important that it explains how the disability impacts the functions or limits one or more major life activities. It should be current, but that really depends on the disability. If it's a learning disability and it's 3, 4 years old, I'm okay with that personally as a disability provider, because that's a lifelong disability. And then I would ask the student about how it currently impacts them. But if it's a mental health or physical or health related disability, you might be asked to provide documentation more often, just to kind of re-up. But usually if it's a learning disability or a permanent disability, you're only registering that one time and providing the documentation one time. But again, if it's a disability where you might need to get a sort of a refresher, they could ask for an annual update. Really important to note that a recommendation on your documentation for accommodations are not a guarantee of them. So if you get an evaluation and then they list a ton of different things, that doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to get those accommodations. Next slide. I think we covered this already. Accommodations are free. So by law, they cannot, colleges cannot charge for an accommodation, only for those extra support programs. Okay, and this really just brings us back to the beginning, to what Christina was talking about, of how important, now that you've sort of seen the whole arc of it, high school into college, why it's so important for students to start getting involved in those IEP meetings, to understand their strengths, their challenges, to know how to ask for help and build those self-determination skills, especially those executive function skills, because those are so, so important. The students who were successful when I worked in college were not always the students that came with the highest grades and credentials from high school. The students who did the best are the students who showed up at my door in the Disability Services Office regularly. The students who accessed the support, the students who asked for help and were involved in their education and their planning, those are the students that are successful. So I will end with that and just say that the handout that you're going to get is going to have a number of things on it. It's going to have a little sheet on the difference between high school and college. It's going to list a book for you. It's called the K&W Guide for to colleges with students with learning differences. It's a good starting point, but it's not everything. Talk to your guidance counselor if you don't want to buy it. They may have it in your guidance office that you could borrow or look at. But it is a starting point. It's basically they survey all the colleges and ask them about supports. So not every college has to respond. So not everything is in there, but it's a good starting point. You'll have a link to that. You're going to have a link to a list of colleges that have extra support programs. It is not exhaustive, but it's just something to get you started. I've got on the sheet different assessments. So learning style inventories, is college for you, guides to college readiness, all of these things that students and families can do together on their own or can work on at school, as well as another few resources for you. So gap year information, transition programs, all of that. So I hope that resource will be helpful to you. I'm going to kick it back to Julie.
Thank you so much, all of you. I mean, this is really terrific. The three of you really span the whole arc of preparing for this important transition. And I think your example, Carin, of the student who came into your office and said, I just get the accommodations, I don't know why, is really very telling. And it really helps us understand why we need to back up, like Christina said, and start preparing students when they're in middle school so that when they get to an office, a counselor in the office with students with disabilities, they know what their disability is and they can have that conversation so they can develop a good list of accommodations that will actually provide them with access and hopefully enable them to be successful. So this was
Yeah,
really
and
terrific. I want to open it up to questions, and I see that there is one. How can parents help their children to prepare for college without them, since parents are so involved in high school? Cutting the cord.
I mean, I think I'll let everybody else respond as well. But one thing that I did when I worked in the high school with my seniors is I would talk to the parents and see if it was cool with them and ask the student if they were interested. But I would work with them on applying for accommodations at college. So somebody who's not their parent guiding them through it. And so what we would do is I would have them request if they were over 18, I would have them do it. If not, I would have their parents do it. Request from the central office of the district their documents, their IEP and their evaluations, and they would get it and download it onto their computer. And then I would sit with them, and this was after acceptance, of course. We'd go on the website together and see how to apply, and they would do it all on their laptop, and I would just be behind them on their shoulder, guiding them, filling out the application if it was an online one, setting up their intake appointment, and just helping them to do that. Somebody who's not a parent, just getting them to do it, just being in the back seat, watching them do it and giving them pointers to try and get them in the senior year to start taking charge of that accommodation process. So that by the time they get to the college, they already know how to do it because they've done it and they've done it without their parent. So that's just one thing that can be done in the senior year that I found really helpful for the students to start to gain independence in that area.
Yeah. No, I would agree, Carin, 100%. And I think we covered a lot of it, but I would also say to parents, parent to parent, this is very hard to do, but when your child is a senior, let them go to the meetings, let them ask for the accommodations. Don't do the work for them. And if they fail, let them fail. That is really hard to do as a parent, but that is one thing that you have to do sometimes. And then you hope the student would learn. Don't fill out their college applications. Don't you can maybe look at their essay if they ask you to, but let them meet those deadlines, which is also hard to do. So start pulling back. And parents get so wrapped up these days sometimes, and I'm one of those parents too, so I understand in your child's success that you want to do things for them, but the more you advocate when they're on the brink of adulthood, the harder it will be for them to do it themselves. So it's not easy, but just to the extent you can step back, you know.
One other thing that we actually talked about, I talked about with the panelists as we were preparing, high schools are required to do an exit summary. A student necessarily isn't, I'm not sure if a student is actually required to be at that meeting, But I would encourage families to try to not orchestrate, but make sure that the student is involved in that exit summary meeting, because this document is a great opportunity for the student to weigh in and tell the school representative who's preparing the exit summary what they think they will need after high school. What did they need in high school? Why was it useful? And what would be useful in college? And that is a document that can be included in your document package. So someone like Carin could be reviewing this document, and it can really be very meaty and really help guide the disability office on what the student has benefited from the past, and what the high school thinks the student will need to have access in college.
I just want to chime in real quick. The exit summary, think of it as an exit interview that will probably happen in your child's future as a young adult when their interests change and they want to go from one place of employment to another. That's typically part of protocol, to sit down with someone one-on-one and do an exit interview. So you see how like it's all part of like this progression, young adulthood, as we go forward. And I agree with what the other panelists had mentioned already.
Okay, so we have some other questions. One attendee asks, other than PACE, both campuses, what other universities in Westchester offer this holistic approach? Does that group include Manhattanville, Valiant Pack, Iona Cap, or WCC Trio?
So I think those are all programs worth exploring. SUNY Purchase also has the Cornerstone program. So I think, it's just about looking at each program and seeing what they do. I don't know today what everything, the ins and outs of each of the programs, but I know that, like, for example, Manhattanville, where the PAC program is meant more as like social and executive functioning, and their Valiant Learning program is academic tutoring, you can sign up for both at like a discounted rate. And so then it becomes a little bit more holistic. So I would talk to each of those colleges. I think you're on the right track with those colleges, but I would also add SUNY Purchase has the Cornerstone program as well. So very locally, those are the ones yeah.
And sort of jumping around here, this may be for Alyssa. Do you have the slides in Spanish, or maybe our panelists as well? This attendee says, I help Latino families in Portchester. So is there a way to make this program accessible for families who are Spanish speaking?
I will answer that one. I will absolutely put that request in, and to the person who asked the question, I will save your contact information and get in touch with you with further details.
Terrific. Thank you, Alyssa. And then we have another question. Does Access VR finance and/or provide any academic or social push-in?
I can cover that one. So my experience has been, and it could have changed, but my experience has been that they provide reimbursement for tutoring, if approved, but it's a pretty low rate. So it will reimburse you for some of the cost, but not nearly all of the cost. So for example, when I was at Manhattanville, we had students who had Access VR timesheets that they brought into the Valiant Learning Support Program, and their tutor would have to sign off on all the hours, and then it was submitted. So the family was paying up front and then submitting all the timesheets, and then Access VR was giving them back some of the funds. So that's the most I've seen in terms of these programs. Is worth asking. They may be doing something different now or something more, but that's been my experience.
Okay, and the last question I see, how does Westchester County Office of Disability work with New York State OPWDD?
Good question. I know we have similar names, but we are two different entities. We do not do anything with OPWDD. We are specifically for all disabilities in Westchester County. They are a state agency. The closest work that's done in the county with OPWDD is actually with our Department of Community Mental Health, DCMH. They have a whole division. So if a family is having difficulty with OPWDD or needs help navigating or applying, there are a couple of staff members in the Department of Community Mental Health that I partner with or that I will refer people to help them. And one of them in particular does actually a lot of transition work. So he works with all the schools to find out how many students are graduating each year and exiting each year who need services from OPWDD, and helps connect people to services.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Wow. So we don't have any more questions, but panelists, Carin, Christina, and Marion, the three of you are terrific, and it's great to have all the different areas of expertise. I feel like we were able to answer all questions, and I want to thank attendees tonight for your questions and for participating. This is a great group, and do we have one more question? Oh, we got some thank yous, and so have a good night, and I hope we can have more forums like this and people will return. And thank you.
Thank you, Julie, for moderating as well. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
My pleasure.
Take care.
My
Thank you all.
pleasure.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.